She had been her mother's precious treasure ever since she was a child. However, while playing inside a fabric dyeing factory, feeling bored because she was alone, she mischievously reached out and touched the nearby machinery, while the female worker in front of her noticed nothing at all. But at the moment the girl turned the wheel, she accidentally got her dress caught inside. After desperately pulling at it with no success, she began calling for help from her mother, who was working nearby. And at that very moment, a sudden accident occurred.
Dina, watch out!
A bucket of boiling alkaline liquid was poured entirely over her mother's body. The girl was terrified by the scene unfolding before her eyes. She could not believe what had happened in an instant, and as continuous cries of pain echoed through the air, nearby villagers were quickly drawn to the scene. At the same time, a panicked female worker rushed over in heartbreak to inform the dye factory's owner, who was also the husband of the victim. When the man nervously checked on his wife's condition, her skin had already been burned beyond recognition. Unable to endure the overwhelming pain and unable to accept the cruel reality, the man, consumed by rage, walked toward his daughter, who stood watching from a distance, believing that all the brutal consequences were caused by her. And in truth, that was indeed the case. The man attempted to vent all his grief and sorrow onto his daughter, but fortunately the villagers nearby stepped in just in time, preventing the situation from escalating further. Afterward, the girl was locked by her father inside a storage room, forced to endure the pain brought by loneliness and isolation. Being so young was already a heavy blow, and now suffering such cold treatment made her fearful of everything around her, leaving her body and mind severely damaged. She even began imagining strange sounds in her ears, causing her behavior to gradually become unsettling. At that moment, an opening in the floor was quietly lifted, revealing Dina's only friend, Tomas. Seeing that someone had come to visit her, Dina's manner of movement itself appeared strange. When she approached her little companion, she even reached out with both hands to feel around his face, making the scene deeply unsettling. After being trapped inside the depressing wooden shack for 3 days, Dina seemed like a person whose soul had been drained, drowning in guilt over her mother while also enduring her father's cold indifference. And in the end, her mother, who had suffered severe burns, still passed away. In order to escape this painful chapter of life, Dina's father lit a torch, and after the workers finished pouring gasoline, he set fire to the factory building that had caused the accident. At the same time, a close friend standing nearby picked up his luggage, willing to travel with him to clear his mind and bury this tragic experience forever. Just as the two were preparing to board the ship and leave, Dina was also released, staring blankly into the distance with hollow eyes. Her father had not looked at her even once over these past few days, let alone shown the slightest bit of concern. Her mother had gone to heaven, her father had abandoned her emotionally, and the poor girl was left wondering how she should face the life ahead. People often lose their mental balance after suffering a devastating blow, let alone an 8-year-old child. After that, she entered the room where her mother once lived, feeling that long-lost sense of familiarity. At the same time, she took out a magnifying glass from a wooden box, because her mother liked to read the Bible in this way. But when the girl tried to flip through the ancient book herself, a suddenly appearing image filled her with fear. Dina kept staring at it, and in an instant, she felt deeply uneasy all over her body, especially as the lamp on the ceiling kept trembling and swaying. She became extremely frightened and hurriedly left the room. During the days when her father was away, Dina often went to a seaside cliff, covering her eyes with a white cloth to experience a game she used to play with her mother. But this was a cliff dozens of meters deep, and once she fell, there would be no chance of survival. Perhaps the girl had begun trying to summon her mother's spirit, developing a strange fascination with death. But at this critical moment, the shout of a household servant abruptly interrupted her fantasy. It turned out that Dina's father had returned and brought her a doll from his travels. Clearly, her father had changed his previous attitude and was preparing to accept his daughter once again. But Dina, who had grown up in loneliness, had become wild and uncontrollable, and she suddenly bit her father hard. Because of this, Dina was locked into an even harsher woodshed, and the one who always came to visit her was Tomas, gazing at her with a pair of clear, innocent eyes. On the other side, the father truly had no way to deal with his daughter, so he called in his close friend Jacob. He suggested hiring a private tutor, believing that a change of environment might help, and the facts proved him right. Soon, the father invited a gentleman to the house, but the man seemed even more unhinged than Dina, leaving the girl completely stunned the moment he entered, making her think there was something wrong with him. as she casually picked up the Bible to defend herself. Unexpectedly, the male teacher pointed to the cello nearby, saying he would perform a special piece just for Dina. When the beautiful melody filled the air, the girl immediately let down her guard, experiencing a feeling she had never known before, as if all the pressure in her heart had been released and she once again felt the meaning of being alive. This is the power of music. The moment the strings vibrate, humanity finds a soul code beyond language. Life is like an unfinished symphony, every pause gathering strength, every variation resisting emptiness. When they shed tears together for the same melody, the desolate universe gains a warm interpretation. And just like that, as time quietly passed, 10 years went by in the blink of an eye. Dina grew from a deranged little girl into a young woman, and many guests came to the house to listen to her perform, especially her father's close friend Jacob, who not only loved the beautiful melodies but also admired this graceful young woman. When the music ended, Jacob called Dina's father outside and made a difficult request. Ever since his wife passed away, he had lived alone for many years, and although he was more than 20 years older than Dina, he still held feelings of affection, so he wished to marry her. At first, Dina's father was shocked when he heard this, but after thinking it over carefully, marrying his daughter to Jacob did not seem like a bad idea. First, Jacob was his sincere friend, and second, the two still had business dealings together, so the man did not hesitate much before agreeing to Jacob's request. Upon hearing this exciting news, the nearly 50-year-old man was as happy as a child. However, their conversation was overheard by Dina's friend Tomas nearby. Early the next morning, Jacob sent his stepson with a horse as a small token of goodwill. The poor girl knew nothing about it yet. When her father finally told her the news, the situation took an unpredictable turn. The daughter firmly opposed the marriage, because she had already given her heart to the family tutor who had accompanied her growth.
You will marry him!
Never! Don't you ever hit me again!
As a child, her father often beat her, and those memories frequently flashed through her mind. So as an adult, she refused to accept any more harm, but rejecting the arranged marriage brought misfortune to the tutor instead. The father blamed everything on him, believing he had stolen his daughter's affection, and decided to dismiss him on the spot. 10 full years of companionship were repaid with an order to leave immediately. The next day at the farewell pier, Dina could not bear the reality of her teacher's departure. For all these years, it was he who helped her out of despair and even gave her the courage to keep living. This deep bond formed over time was about to be erased, and the girl could not accept it. It seemed to reopen the wounds of her tragic childhood, causing her mind to collapse once again. Then she tightly wrapped her hands around his bow tie. If she could not be with the one she loved, then death seemed like the only release. Just as the man was about to lose consciousness, a sudden shout came from the ferry arriving at the pier, snapping the mentally shaken girl out of her trance, and the family tutor seemed to understand Dina very well. After recovering from the struggle, he held no resentment at all.
I understand.
After the man she loved left, Dina fell into a long period of silence and emptiness. In the end, she unwillingly married her father's close friend and followed Jacob to the port of Rainsons. Her husband's family business was large, and naturally there were many servants employed. Everyone worked busily, all to provide the best possible wedding for the young bride. But to Dina, all of this was meaningless, because she did not love the man beside her at all. Her father had personally destroyed her life, and now she could only face reality. Soon after, Jacob's mother sincerely welcomed her new daughter-in-law. At the same time, she introduced the household cook, showing her thoughtful intentions. However, Jacob had also adopted two stepsons. A young man named Niels removed his hat in greeting, and he and Dina were close in age. The cheerful stepson wanted to kiss his new stepmother, but Jacob quickly stopped him. Next, Jacob took his wife to see their bridal chamber, where their long-anticipated moment would take place. There was no need to wait for nightfall, as once they returned home, their duty could be fulfilled. Jacob looked at the girl he had long desired and finally achieved his wish, making him impatient. His actions were overly reckless, leaving Dina, who had never experienced such things, filled with anger. After strongly rejecting his demands, she kicked her husband hard in a vital spot.
Dina! Come down, Dina! Please, on my knees! Crazy mind, do you want to ruin the whole wedding?
You beast!
Yes, I know.
You're like a stallion, you!
No! It won't happen again!
And you expect me to believe that?
Hey! Jacob Grinlow, swear by Almighty God that I will never again carry on like a stallion.
After this turmoil, the wife chose to forgive Jacob. However, when they moved on to the next step, the husband unexpectedly covered his face in embarrassment. After the wedding guests dispersed, the place returned to its former calm. Jacob then walked out of the bridal room with his wife, smiling warmly as he greeted his mother who was preparing the meal. Clearly, everything had gone quite smoothly, but when Dina sat down, her behavior was completely unlike that of a refined lady, as she poured 3 glasses of water in a row and drank them all in one go out of thirst. Even the 2 stepsons were stunned, wondering what kind of intense activity could have left their stepmother this thirsty. Then, the old lady had something to say. Since the family ran pork businesses, she wanted her daughter-in-law to take part in some work as well, but Dina ignored her directly, because she knew nothing and preferred to be a free housewife. Her husband also agreed with his wife, as he cherished his young bride too much to let her work at a crowded port. So Jacob did not support his mother's idea either, but Dina was naturally gifted for business. When her husband negotiated deals with 3 cunning merchants, Jacob was honest and simple, easily confused by their tricks. Just as he was about to sign an unfavorable agreement, Dina suddenly stopped him. Though she appeared indifferent on the side, she had been carefully analyzing the hidden intentions of the others all along. Because of this, the 3 old men tried to cover up the truth, but Dina was truly extraordinary, as she quietly conducted market research and used solid data to leave all 3 of them completely speechless. However, touching someone else's interests is bound to make people uncomfortable.
Quite frankly, I think you should leave.
My wife stays.
Oh, and I'd love a cigar.
Yet good times never last long. When Dina went into the city with her husband to handle business, the marketplace was packed with onlookers. Because an execution was about to take place, the crowded streets were nearly impossible to move through. So Dina also wanted to stop the carriage and watch the spectacle. To others, this might have seemed normal, since executions happened frequently. But for Dina, it was different. A powerful sense of death surged toward her, as if awakening memories from her childhood. Ever since her mother died in that accident, Dina had developed a strange fascination with death, and the atmosphere at the scene perfectly matched it. As she watched the man about to be executed, she uttered something utterly unsettling.
Look at me. Let all the cares and sorrows of this world fall away from you. Look at me. Let go.
When the drums meant to stir the crowd fell silent, the criminal was hoisted high by the rope, and after a few seconds of struggle, his life slipped away. At the same time, Dina seemed to see her deceased mother standing beside the condemned man, staring directly at her. That familiar force of mental collapse once again swept over the lost Dina, and everything that happened silently in that moment was noticed by a man within the crowd. When the couple returned to the port, Dina seemed like a completely different person, drinking heavily and chatting freely with several men on the ship, completely ignoring her husband's feelings. Jacob tried to pull his wife away, but all signs showed that Dina had become disturbingly abnormal. Even at night when it was time to rest, she kept playing her instrument non-stop, night after night, driving her husband to emotional collapse. He never imagined his wife would turn into this, yet he was powerless to stop it, and so every night he fell asleep alone in agony. Over time, the lonely man desperately needed companionship, and he rekindled an old relationship with a nearby widow. Jacob had known this woman even before marriage, and now that his wife was lost in music every night, it was inevitable that his depressed heart would seek comfort elsewhere. But fate is unpredictable, and as Dina's strings snapped, an unexpected disaster struck at that very moment. It turned out that while repairing the roof for his lover, Jacob accidentally slipped and broke his leg. Under the conditions at the time, treatment was impossible, and even the doctor admitted there was nothing he could do. It felt like an omen, a premonition of death. In the following days, Jacob's temperament changed drastically, and he lashed out at the servants at every turn. His injured leg began to rot, and it was clear that he endured unbearable pain every single day. The family was completely helpless, and his mother could not bear the reality. Watching her son suffer such misfortune, she could only cling to him and cry each day, overwhelmed by unbearable anguish. With the family's silent consent, Dina prepared to make one final attempt for her husband's condition. Braving fierce winds and heavy snow, she took the dying Jacob away, heading toward the city to find a more renowned doctor hoping to amputate his leg in exchange for his life. Yet unexpectedly, she brought Jacob to a desolate wilderness several kilometers away, with a deep abyss tens of meters below. Then Dina pushed the sled with all her strength, stubbornly dragging her husband toward the edge of the cliff. The storm battered her fragile body, as extreme cold collided with the turmoil in her heart. In the end, using her last remaining strength, she brought her husband to the mountaintop. Perhaps this was the only way to end the suffering, and she only hoped her husband would understand everything she had done.
Look at me, Jacob. Let all the cares and sorrows of this world fall away from you.
After praying for her husband, Dina gave the sled a forceful push, and Jacob became one with nature forever. You are the boundless white snow, and I am merely dust in this world. Their marriage had always been an accident, and this way of ending the pain was both a release for the husband and a way for the wife to take control of her own fate. After everything was done, Dina felt a moment of confusion, followed by relief. When she finally dragged her exhausted body home, she fell from her horse. As people rushed to help her, her face was covered in blood, and she appeared completely unhinged. Perhaps this was her way of concealing the truth, silently accepting the explanation that the carriage went too fast, causing her husband to fall off the cliff with the sled. And the next morning, the household servants found Jacob's body. Even during her husband's funeral, Dina continued to display signs of a mental breakdown. Under this extreme conditioned response, not a single person in the household questioned Dina's lies. She screamed hysterically without pause, and even her father could not comprehend the pain his daughter had endured. Once Jacob's burial was hastily completed, Dina's emotions gradually stabilized. At that time, her only friend came to visit her. Tomas was Dina's childhood companion, usually quiet, yet always appearing whenever Dina was at her most helpless. The young man was pure and kind, and also quite handsome. Dina liked to touch his face, and this time once again made Tomas feel uncomfortable. He intended to leave her bedroom immediately, but unexpectedly, Dina grabbed him and pulled him forcefully, her actions nearly frenzied. Perhaps during years of marriage, she had never felt like a real woman beside her husband. After all, Jacob was already old and could hardly provide the care a young wife deserved. So in this quiet setting, Dina opened her heart to the young man. But when everything ended, a faint sound outside instantly snapped Tomas back to reality. He staggered away with his clothes in hand and fled in panic. Unfortunately, this was seen by Jacob's stepson, Niels, and this boy already despised his stepmother, believing she was improper and disruptive to the family. Now, seeing her openly involved with a servant, he even suspected that Dina had caused his stepfather's death, threatening his own inheritance. But lacking evidence, Niels could not openly accuse her for the time being. Dina also sensed the resentment in his heart and deliberately flaunted herself in front of him, leaving the boy furious yet powerless. In this way, winter passed and spring arrived, and before long, the weather grew warmer. At this time, Dina often rode horses with Tomas on the pasture, until one day, the trousers she usually wore no longer fit her body, and the front buttons simply would not fasten, because Dina was already 4 months pregnant. Even so, she still loved riding on the pasture, but with her current condition, she had to rely on Tomas for assistance. No one knew whether the child truly belonged to her late husband. The two stepsons also speculated in private, not daring to question their stepmother openly. After all, judging by the timing, it was possible that their stepfather had left behind a child before his death, but it was also possible that the baby belonged to Tomas, because Niels had once seen the boy leaving his stepmother's bedroom in disheveled clothing. Time passed little by little, until one day, while Tomas was riding in the mountains with his companions, he was suddenly drawn by a miserable cry. He rushed toward the hillside where the sound came from and saw Dina's horse wandering nearby. Tomas immediately realized something was wrong, and quickly followed the direction of the cries into a nearby cave. To his shock, Dina was indeed there. With no warning at all, Dina had chosen to give birth inside the cold, damp cave. Perhaps it was to escape society's control, as she did not want the manor's servants, church clergy, or record keepers to know the child's identity. Or perhaps it reflected her understanding of the intersection between death and life. As someone who had confronted death since childhood, she believed giving birth in a cave symbolized freedom and the rebirth of life. Otherwise, there was no way to explain it. In the end, with Tomas's help, the woman successfully gave birth to a child, welcoming a healthy baby boy. At that moment, life gained a new meaning. Afterward, the child was brought back to the house, but for reasons unknown, Dina, who had always been strong, was unable to produce milk. At a loss, Her mother-in-law could only spend money to hire a wet nurse from outside, and the infant soon stabilized. Everyone else felt deeply relieved, and this newly hired wet nurse was also a woman burdened by hardship. Her husband died at sea, and her child passed away shortly after birth, so she too was a woman controlled by death and fate. Mirroring Dina, she felt a natural closeness to lonely and suffering women. Dina was also willing to entrust the child to her care. Meanwhile, Tomas was troubled by doubts in his heart. He found Dina alone in a small cabin in the wilderness, wanting to confirm whether the child was truly his.
The boy, is he mine?
The woman seemed extremely sensitive about this topic, perhaps connected to her upbringing. Dina's mother died tragically, and her father was cold and heartless, so she instinctively resisted blood ties. The child was a part of her own life and did not need to be bound by any lineage label. That was why she chose to give birth in a cave and named the child Benjamin, symbolizing a child of destiny. A few days later, she took the baby and the wet nurse back to her hometown to visit family, only to unexpectedly discover her stepmother wearing her deceased mother's necklace. This was something Dina could not accept.
It was my mother's.
But now it's Dina's.
It belongs to my mother.
No, this is too much. I'm not a thief. Take it! For God's sake, take it!
Now, her father could only stand by and watch, not daring to show any emotion toward his daughter. After all, when he had arranged her marriage back then, Dina had beaten him so badly that he fled in panic. In the blink of an eye, 6 years passed, and Dina's son Benjamin gradually grew up. But the little boy inherited his mother's ways, and at such a young age, he was encouraged by companions to try a cigar. The boy was instantly choked and casually tossed the cigar onto the grass. However, something terrible still happened, as a raging fire instantly swept through the stables and the barn. All the household servants rushed in bravely, trying to minimize the damage. At this moment, Dina also hurried over after hearing the news, watching the farm she had painstakingly built about to be destroyed. She stood frozen, as if time itself had stopped. At the same time, those tragic experiences from her youth suddenly resurfaced in her memory. Yet at this critical moment, a man suddenly shouted from the crowd. Startled awake, Dina focused her gaze and saw a stranger swiftly fling open the smoke-filled wooden door of the stable. Then, after some time, he miraculously led 2 horses out alive. Dina watched the man's bravery and selflessness, and she was deeply moved. When everything finally ended, the barn had been completely reduced to ashes. At this point, there was nothing left to dwell on, but Dina seemed more concerned about that man. So when the firefighters returned indoors, she followed them and discovered the man's clothes outside the door. For some reason, she picked them up and smelled the cuffs. Perhaps she was trying to sense the aura of heroism. Otherwise, there was no explanation for it. In the pocket, she also found a book of poetry, learning that his name was Leo, a sailor from Russia. But just as Dina was flipping through it carefully, a pair of dark purplish feet walked into view nearby. It turned out that Dina had once again fallen into a hallucination of her deceased husband.
Go away, Jacob. Damn you, leave me alone.
The scene shifted. Inside the room, people had moved on from the incident and were discussing trivial matters. Leo became an honored guest. After all, he had helped save the fire. At this moment, Dina, the family's heir, also joined the conversation, and everyone naturally treated her with great respect. Though she sometimes appeared unhinged, no one in the household dared to provoke this widow. Her uninhibited behavior always left people baffled. Soon, the discussion turned to future financial matters, and Dina occasionally voiced her opinions, looking exactly like a matriarch. And that was indeed the truth. When one of the family's uncles suddenly developed a twisted interest and summoned a young maid, not only holding her hand tightly, but also spewing crude and degrading remarks upon hearing she was from Russia. This enraged Leo, who was also Russian, and he could not tolerate it.
Step outside and I'll show you who says what goes. Huh?
Now, Mr. Shikowski. Drink your brandy. Get out!
After the unpleasant incident passed, people began dancing joyfully to Dina's music. Leo's eyes frequently met Dina's, and it was clear that a different kind of affection was growing between them. But someone in the crowd had drunk too much. While dancing with a servant, the stepson Niels behaved excessively, laying hands on her. The woman eventually ran outside, trying to escape his advances. Unexpectedly, he chased after her, attempting to stop her from fleeing, with greed written all over his face. In the end, the servant failed to escape and was violated in a nearby cabin. After some time, when the two emerged one after the other, they were spotted by Leo. Leo had no interest in the family's affairs, as he was merely a passerby. But Niels, still drunk, seemed eager to confide in someone. He had suffered many grievances in this household, as the inheritance that should have gone to him had fallen into his stepmother's hands, leaving his future bleak. So he desperately wanted to leave, always dreaming of going to America. But that required a large sum of money, something Niels could not easily afford. Unexpectedly, in his drunken state, he offered to show Leo his secret stash of money, exposing his secret without hesitation. Later, Leo met Dina at their agreed location. As a gesture of sincerity toward the mistress of the house, he immediately told her about the hidden fortune, but Dina did not care about that at all and only wanted to understand the man in front of her.
You do realize that we've met one another before? In Bergen. I saw you in Bergen.
Yes, when Dina and her husband had watched an execution in the marketplace, she was summoned by a sense of death and believed she saw her deceased mother. Leo had been there as well, experiencing a mysterious pull, his eyes fixed on Dina from afar.
Why are you here, Mr. Tchaikovsky?
I'm courting you, Dina Greenlaw.
Are you coming back?
They shared a strange connection, one that sparked love between them, and both only hoped the other would return as promised. Early the next morning, Leo left with the ferry. Dina watched her beloved depart from the hillside, and words that invoked death made the two resonate with each other. After Leo was completely gone, Dina fell into a period of emptiness. As evening breezes drifted in, a woman long widowed could not endure the loneliness. She stepped outside and happened to see Tomas working in the warehouse, and without thinking, she followed him, pushed him down without a word, and released all the pent-up emotions of recent days onto him. But this innocent man was nothing more than a tool for Dina to vent her feelings, and no matter how well he treated her, he could never earn her true love. Time passed slowly. Leo remained unheard from, and Dina waited endlessly by the sea. Yet today, she saw a household maid standing alone by the shore, quietly crying, and Dina approached in confusion to ask what had happened. It turned out that the woman had been violated and became pregnant, so Dina tightly embraced her and comforted her. As the head of the entire household, she was determined to seek justice for her servant, but the perpetrator was none other than the stepson adopted by Dina's late husband. When faced with the mistress's questioning, he flatly denied committing any wrongdoing, especially since the other party was merely a lowly servant. However, when Dina attempted to clarify the truth, he immediately lost the respect he once showed her.
Who are you? To walk in here into my office? Who's the father of your child, huh?
These words crossed Dina's bottom line, and Niels also knew that she was not someone to be trifled with. Looking into her furious eyes, the man clearly felt fear, and in the end, he admitted to his crime. Since that was the case, Dina gave him two choices: either pack his belongings and leave the house for good, or marry the injured servant.
I can't marry a girl like that.
Everyone knew that Niels wanted to go to America to build a future, but that required a large amount of money. With things having reached this point, Dina had nothing left to worry about, and she took the opportunity to thoroughly investigate the accounts he handled for the family business. The man was visibly frightened, yet he was still driven out of the house by Dina, and the truth was exactly as expected, because once the mistress left, Niels nervously pulled out a hidden stash of money from beneath the floorboards, all of it secretly skimmed from the accounts over the years, and also his reserve fund for going to America. What he never imagined was that the woman truly took the money away, shattering all his beautiful hopes into nothing. At this moment, he might finally remember how he had let something slip to a stranger while drunk that day. Life soon returned to its former calm, and every member of the family went to church on Sundays to pray, though Niels's mind was clearly elsewhere. At the same time, someone walked into the church who did not belong there, yet still sat among the crowd. A familiar presence drifted over, making Dina suddenly realize something. Yes, it was Leo, the man Dina had longed for, and he had kept his promise and truly returned to find her 1 year later. When the people in the church gradually dispersed, only the two unspoken lovers remained. They exchanged no words, yet their hearts surged with the joy of reunion after a long separation. And what should happen between lovers, in this sacred and solemn church, became something no longer entirely pure. It was rare for Dina to finally have someone she loved, and life seemed filled with hope at that moment. But soon after, Leo revealed during conversation that he would be leaving again the next day.
What?
I have to collect a prisoner there and take him to Bergen.
So you transport prisoners, do you?
That's right.
In the eyes of others, Leo was merely a Russian passerby, and whether he left or stayed made little difference. But for Dina, it was different, because she had given all her love to this man and feared losing him one day. Driven by overwhelming thoughts, her mind collapsed once more, and visions of death returned. She then saw her mother's spirit again, and every time such visions appeared, someone nearby was destined to leave. And could that person be Leo? At that moment, Niels walked out of the restroom and interrupted Dina's hallucination, yet he spoke words that were deeply unsettling.
Niels will also be leaving us very soon.
Where are you going, Niels?
To America, if he can afford it.
Ever since his money had been taken by Dina, Niels had fallen into complete despair. The only thing he could do now was beg the pregnant servant for forgiveness. Perhaps only then would Dina return the money to him, but would the woman he had hurt ever accept this man's redemption?
I've been thinking, why don't we get married? What do you say? Say something. The master is asking you to marry him. The master is telling you. He's telling you to marry him!
Thank you. No.
If she rejected the proposal, it would mean that he would have nothing left in this household. Meanwhile, Dina was saying her final farewell to Leo, when a sudden sense of death rushed toward them. Dina had always been sensitive to this feeling, and surprisingly, Leo sensed it as well, revealing a mysterious connection between them. As the presence of death drew closer, both of them held their breath, but to their surprise, when the door opened, it was a household maid standing there.
Sorry, ma'am. You have to come right away.
As expected, in utter despair, Niels had chosen to take his own life. He had lost financial freedom, lost his family status and future hope, and lost the servant who was his final lifeline. Under such pressure, his suicide was a desperate response to a life completely out of control, and this also confirmed that the soul they had just seen belonged to Niels. As time hurried on, Dina was constantly plagued by visions of death and had never truly been normal, yet she still held hope for life. Because she was carrying Leo's child, she poured all her longing for her beloved into the poems of Pushkin, only wishing that Leo would return to her soon. But reality often turns out far harsher than imagination. When Dina returned to her hometown once again, she heard from her father that Leo had been arrested. The reason was his involvement in an assassination attempt against Russian nobility, and he was even suspected of being a spy sent by Russia. When he went to Oslo again to meet his associates, he was arrested on the spot by Nordic police, and his chances of survival were slim. Hearing this, Dina felt as if the sky had collapsed, because she did not care what kind of person Leo was, only the sincerity of their love. So after asking her father for the prison's location, she firmly decided to go rescue him, but her father stopped her in time. Leo was a serious criminal, and she should not risk her own life for so-called love, but Dina did not care at all, and no one could shake her resolve. After saying goodbye to her son at the dock, Dina boarded a ship bound for Bergen, and this journey seemed to foreshadow grave danger ahead. Not long after, Dina arrived at her destination, but as a lone woman, how could she possibly challenge the government's decision? It was nothing but a futile struggle. No one was willing to listen to her explanation, believing that a woman blinded by love was utterly foolish. In the end, however, the officials agreed to grant Dina one chance to visit Leo in prison, and so, their reunion took place inside a prison, completely different from anything she had imagined. Dina did not truly understand the man standing before her, yet she believed in this love.
I don't know anything about you. Who are you?
I'm no one, Dina. I'm no one. I have my mission.
I can't marry a man who does not exist.
Oh, are we to be married?
Yes.
As the visiting time came to an end, the guard began urging Dina to leave, but before she could tell him about the child she was carrying, the guards stopped her. This was not her home, and her actions would come at a price. The heavy blow to Dina's abdomen would inevitably cause fatal harm to the unborn child. She was then dragged away by the guard and violently thrown outside. All beautiful illusions shattered, and on the ship returning her home, she was caught in a violent storm. while the pain in her abdomen only made the journey even more unbearable. At this point, she could only rely on Anderson, who had accompanied her and was another stepson of her late husband, to help her survive the ordeal. But Dina was bleeding heavily, and the man kept tearing at her dress again and again, desperately trying to stop death from arriving. Fortunately, the lifeless fetus slipped out smoothly, and Dina's bleeding gradually eased. Though Anderson was flustered, he handled everything as gently as possible, showing an unexpected maturity and compassion. As the storm subsided, the fairy Dina was on slowly made its way back home. Anderson stayed by her side the entire time, until the poor woman finally regained full consciousness.
They all die, and the ones that don't die, I kill.
After resting at home for several days, hearing children playing outside made it seem as if everything had returned to normal. At that moment, Anderson, her late husband's stepson, walked in, and perhaps Dina truly should find a steady man to accompany her through the rest of her life. But just as Anderson was about to confess his feelings, Dina immediately saw through his intentions and firmly rejected him, because she could not escape true love. Even Tomas, who once pursued her, was now together with the violated maid. Fate had played a cruel joke, leaving only Dina as the one who had truly lost everything. Fortunately, she still had her son by her side, and Benjamin was obedient, often playing with his mother on the lake. Dina even taught him how to sail, once trying to surpass the cargo ship nearby. But just as the boy waved to the people on board, a sudden fierce wind struck like a cursed destiny, instantly knocking Benjamin into the water. Seeing her son's life in danger, the mother immediately jumped into the lake to save him. At the same time, people on the nearby large ship cried out for help, quickly drawing a man's attention. Relying on sheer willpower, Dina finally found her drowning son and pushed Benjamin above the water, but her own strength was completely exhausted. The boy kept shouting her name from the boat, yet could not awaken his mother's sinking body. At that moment, the passage of life seemed to replay repeatedly in her mind, and she saw her deceased mother's spirit, as if calling out to her. But just then, a man on the large ship leapt forward without hesitation, jumped into the water, and pulled the nearly submerged Dina back up. That man was Leo, the one who had been imprisoned, raising the question of whether he had escaped or if there was another truth, leaving it an unsolved mystery. As the woman awoke from unconsciousness, she felt a long-lost sense of beauty, yet fear immediately followed, because she was terrified of losing Leo again. So she wandered outside searching aimlessly, only to discover Leo looking for money.
What are you doing?
Do you know where the money is?
Is that why you came back? Because you needed money?
This was the place where Niels had hidden his secret stash, which Dina had already taken long ago, leaving Leo furious. He then prepared to leave, but this time, Dina would not allow him to disappear from her life again.
What are you doing? If this is your way of making a proposal, it's a poor way to go about it.
I won't ever let anyone leave me again.
Can't hang around here, tied to your apron strings.
And I'm glad your baby bled away.
What?
I won't let you leave me.
Since accidentally causing her mother's death, Dina's personality had grown extreme, and her intense emotional need for control made her love for Leo mixed with a desire to possess him completely. Rather than watching her beloved leave again and again, death seemed like a more decisive release, and that gunshot symbolized the explosion of long-suppressed emotions and her inescapable fate of loneliness. Yet all of this turned out to be an illusion, and the film ends here. In truth, Leo had already been executed in prison, and Dina being rescued was also an illusion. After saving her son from the lake, Dina saw her deceased mother's spirit, marking the moment when her fate with death was sealed. Dina's obsession imagined Leo pulling her back from the edge of death, completing a closed loop of destiny-bound emotion, which runs through the entire film's theme. Death, love, and redemption are Dina's eternal pursuit and illusion, and in the end, she achieves a final reconciliation with her own fate. This film is adapted from the renowned novel The Book of Dina by Norwegian writer Hergjorg Wassmo, a cold elegy about loneliness, possession, and a cursed destiny. The film tells the story of Dina, who after witnessing her mother's death as a child, becomes bound by the shadow of death and emotional chains, while her father's emotional coldness after losing his wife pushes her into a desolate life. As an adult, she burns with an intense desire for love, yet can never endure loss. She turns every intimate relationship into an altar of destruction, pushing her husband off a cliff and shooting her lover in a hallucination, driven solely by endless loneliness and possessive desire. Through harsh Nordic landscapes and nightmarish visual language, the film intertwines reality and illusion, desire and destiny, shaping a tragic collapse of life and emotional dislocation. The more Dina longs for love, the more she destroys what she loves through extreme obsession, and in the final scene, she embraces the illusory Leo in the lake. Like the soul's final struggle and the sigh at the end of fate's cycle, this is not only the story of one woman's destruction, but also a ruthless interrogation of human loneliness, desire, and the curse of destiny.